Hey everyone, welcome back. We're gonna do something a little different today. We're gonna dive into a topic that might surprise you a bit. It's the economics of being a man. We've got this really interesting podcast episode here that argues that while we often, we rightly so focus on the financial hurdles women face, there's a whole other side to this economic inequality story, and it often gets overlooked. So get ready to maybe challenge some assumptions and see the world through a new lens.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. It's interesting how this episode kind of reframes that whole economic inequality discussion. It doesn't shy away from the very real issues that women face, but it also encourages us to consider the unique pressures and disadvantages that men experience too.
Exactly. And one of the first things that really kind of jumped out at me was this whole idea of the provider pressure cooker. That societal expectation that men have to be the primary breadwinners. I remember even back in college, like there was this unspoken pressure to pick a major that would guarantee a good salary so I could provide, for a future family. It's like this invisible weight that's hanging over so many financial decisions, even from a young age.
Yeah, it's so deeply ingrained in our culture. I mean, it's really powerful, and that pressure can manifest in a lot of different ways. Stress, anxiety, maybe even pushing men towards riskier financial choices just to try and meet those expectations. What I thought was really fascinating is that this episode also linked that pressure to financial loneliness, this idea that men are less likely to seek out financial advice or support, so they kind of end up feeling isolated when it comes to money matters.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like they're carrying this burden solo, which can lead to some pretty, detrimental consequences like impulsive decisions, investment mistakes, maybe even prioritizing short-term gains over long-term financial stability. Have you seen this at all, like in your own life or with people you know?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like this unspoken rule that men should just be able to handle their finances on their own, without showing any vulnerability. And that can be so damaging because it prevents them from tapping into support systems and resources that could actually help them make, more informed decisions. Think about it. Like, if you're struggling with debt or you're feeling overwhelmed by financial planning, wouldn't it be helpful to have someone to talk to? Someone to offer some guidance or maybe just a listening ear.
Totally. It's like trying to navigate a complex maze without a map. You might eventually stumble on the exit, but it's going to be a lot more challenging and probably a lot more wrong turns along the way.
Exactly. And that's where I think this episode offers some really great insights. It encourages men to break free from that silence, to seek out financial advice, whether it's from a professional advisor or maybe a trusted friend or even an online community.
Yeah, there's strength in recognizing when you need help. There's no weakness in that.
Exactly. It's about fostering that sense of community, recognizing that we don't have to navigate those complex financial waters alone. There's a lot of support out there if we're willing to just, reach out and ask for it.
This episode also dives into some pretty startling statistics, like the fact that men generally have shorter lifespans than women. Now, before anyone starts panicking, it's not about being morbid or dwelling on the negative.
No, it's not about that at all. It's more about, reframing how we approach financial planning. If we acknowledge that men statistically have less time to accumulate wealth and enjoy their earnings, and it might encourage different choices, maybe prioritizing experiences and milestones earlier in life rather than just solely focusing on those long-term goals like retirement.
Yeah, it's like a perspective shift, focusing on living a fulfilling life now while still planning for the future.
Exactly, finding that balance, recognizing that life is a journey to be enjoyed, not just a destination to reach.
The episode also tackles the healthcare system a bit and how it often seems to prioritize women's needs over men's. They cite some pretty specific examples, like disparities in research funding for conditions that mostly affect men, and even how medical practices might be less attuned to men's unique health concerns.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that they don't just make these claims, they actually back them up with some pretty concrete examples. For instance, they highlight this research from Specific Research Institute that shows that conditions predominantly affecting men receive significantly less funding than those affecting women.
It's funny, we joke about the man flu all the time, but that stereotype can actually be really detrimental. It might prevent men from seeking medical attention when they really need it, simply because they don't want to appear weak or be dismissed.
Oh, that's a great point. Those societal expectations can really impact those health-seeking behaviors. And delaying treatment, even for something that seems minor, can actually lead to bigger problems down the road. And that can affect, their ability to work and earn over a lifetime.
Yeah, it's like a chain reaction. Ignoring a health issue can lead to bigger complications, which could then impact their financial well-being and long-term security.
And it all ties back to those deep-rooted societal norms that we've been talking about. It's fascinating how these expectations can influence everything from our financial decisions to our healthcare choices.
Okay, before we move on, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the wage gap. The episode acknowledges that it exists, but it also makes this argument that men often face this expectation to work longer hours and take on more demanding leadership roles, which can then contribute to burnout and a skewed sense of reward for their efforts.
Yeah, it's a nuanced perspective. It challenges the way we typically frame these discussions. It's not about denying it that the wage gap exists or diminishing the challenges that women face. It's more about recognizing that it's a really complex issue and acknowledging that men also experience these unique pressures in the workplace.
Have you ever felt that, like in your own career, to work longer hours or take on more responsibility? I know I've definitely felt it sometimes. Like there's this unspoken expectation that you have to be constantly pushing and striving and sacrificing personal time for the sake of, professional success.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a very real thing. It all ties into those traditional gender roles that say men should be ambitious and driven and always striving for more.
And that constant pursuit of success can come at a cost, right? Burnout, stress, neglecting personal relationships. It's a trade-off that we need to be more aware of.
Yeah, it's about recognizing the downsides of that always-on mentality and finding ways to create a healthier work-life balance, even in like those really demanding professional environments.
So we've covered a lot. The pressure to be the provider, the impact of a shorter lifespan on financial planning healthcare hurdles, and the nuances of the wage gap. And there's still so much more to explore.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's take a quick pause and we'll be right back to continue exploring the economic landscape through this really unique lens.
Welcome back. It's been really interesting so far. I'm learning a lot.
Me too. It's like we're seeing this whole other side of the economic inequality story. Before the break, we were talking about that pressure men face in the workplace, the long hours, the demanding roles, the burnout. And this episode, it connects that to another really fascinating point, the types of jobs men often hold.
Yeah, they talk about how men are more likely to work in these higher risk industries like construction or mining or manufacturing jobs that are, obviously crucial to our economy, but they often come with, a greater risk of accidents, injuries, long-term health problems.
Yeah, they really paint this vivid picture of the physical demands and the potential hazards these men face every day. I remember reading a statistic from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that just kind of hit me. In 2023, over 90% of workplace fatalities in the U.S. were men, and a big chunk of those were in these high-risk industries.
Yeah, that's a pretty sobering statistic. And the episode argues that these risks, they don't just affect their immediate safety. They can have some pretty serious long-term consequences for a man's financial well-being, especially when you start thinking about retirement planning.
Right, it's like this domino effect. You get injured early in your career, could lead to chronic pain or limitations later on, and that could impact a man's ability to work as he gets older and then potentially derail his retirement plans.
Exactly. So that's where financial planning becomes super important for men in these types of jobs. They need to be thinking about things like disability insurance, maybe exploring, different career options if their health starts to decline, being proactive about saving for retirement earlier than they might have thought.
Right, it's about acknowledging those risks and then taking steps to, mitigate them both for their physical health and their long-term financial security. It reminds me of a friend of mine. He worked in construction for years. He loved the work, but after he hurt his back, he had to completely rethink his career path. It wasn't easy, but he was able to transition to a less physically demanding job, and he started planning for, a different kind of future.
Yeah, that's a great example of how, adaptability and planning ahead can make such a huge difference. And it kind of brings us back to financial literacy, which we were talking about earlier. Men, especially those in these high-risk industries, need access to resources and guidance that can help them make those tough financial decisions.
Absolutely. It's about empowering them with, the knowledge and the tools to build a secure future, no matter what challenges they face.
Now let's go back to financial loneliness for a second. The episode highlights this as a big issue for a lot of men. Societal norms often discourage men from asking for help with their finances, and that leads to this sense of isolation and, potentially some bad decisions.
Right? It's like this cycle of silence. They feel like they have to handle everything themselves. They don't want to appear weak or incompetent. And that can be really dangerous, especially given how complex, the financial world is today.
Exactly. And the episode emphasizes the importance of breaking down that stigma around being vulnerable with your finances. Encourage men to open up, have honest conversations with each other, with their partners, maybe seek out some professional guidance.
It's interesting how this connects to that whole breaking the silence message that runs throughout the episode. It's not just about finances. It's about encouraging men to talk about their experiences, their struggles, their successes without feeling ashamed or judged.
Exactly. It's about building a sense of community and support, recognizing that we all face challenges and we don't have to face them alone.
So how do we turn this into action? How do we encourage those conversations? How do we create a more supportive environment for men when it comes to their financial realities?
That's the big question, isn't it? Well, I think it starts with awareness. Recognizing the pressures, the expectations, the potential pitfalls that men face. And it's about creating spaces where it's okay to be vulnerable. Maybe start a conversation with a friend, a family member. Share your own experiences and let them know they're not alone.
Yeah, we can challenge those old school stereotypes that tell men they have to be stoic and self-reliant and, financially invincible. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to admit when you're struggling. It's okay to seek guidance from other people.
And it's not just about men talking to men, women, partners, friends, family members. We all have a role to play in supporting the men in our lives and advocating for, a more equitable economic landscape.
We can listen, we can offer encouragement, and we can challenge those norms that keep these pressures in place.
Remember, financial well-being isn't just about the numbers in your bank account. It's about your health, your happiness, your ability to live a fulfilling life.
It's about finding that balance between, financial security and your own well-being, recognizing that both are important for a successful and meaningful life.
And that's a perfect lead into the last part of our deep dive. We'll be back in a bit to explore some potential solutions and talk about how we can all create a more supportive and equitable economic environment for everyone.
We're back and ready to kind of wrap up this deep dive into the economic side of being a man. It's it's been eye-opening for sure. I mean, this episode has really challenged some of my own assumptions and given me a new perspective on things.
Yeah, it's definitely been thought-provoking. We've covered a lot, the provider pressure cooker and how it ties into financial loneliness, the unique challenges men face in those high-risk jobs. But the question is, where do we go from here? How do we go beyond just talking about it and start to actually, make a difference?
Right. That's the big question. And I think this episode gives us some good ideas. They talk about the importance of breaking the silence, both individually and as a society.
Yeah, on an individual level, it's about encouraging men to open up about their experiences with money, to ask for help when they need it, and to really examine those expectations that can be so harmful. But it also goes beyond just individual action.
So you're talking about like systemic change, like addressing those bigger societal norms that are contributing to all these pressures.
Exactly. We need to change the whole narrative around what it means to be a man and what it means to be successful. We need to create a culture where it's okay to be vulnerable, where that's seen as a strength and not a weakness. A culture where asking for help is totally normal and not something to be ashamed of.
Okay, so that's the big picture. But what about like tangible steps? What can we do in our everyday lives to get there?
Well, I think one thing we can do is be more aware of the language we use. Like when we hear those jokes about man flu or comments that reinforce this idea that men should just suck it up and not show their emotions, we can push back a little. Gently challenge those ideas. It's about shifting the conversation little by little and creating space for a more, realistic and nuanced view of masculinity.
I like that. It's about those small everyday moments where we can start to chip away at those stereotypes.
Right. And on a more personal level, we can encourage the men in our lives to, prioritize their well-being, remind them that it's okay to take a break, set some boundaries, ask for help when they need it.
It's about redefining what success looks like, right? Not just focusing on, money and career achievements, but also valuing things like mental health and strong relationships and having a sense of purpose.
Absolutely. And in the workplace, we can advocate for policies that support a healthy work-life balance, policies that provide access to mental health resources and promote an open and supportive work environment.
So it's kind of a multi-pronged approach: individual action, cultural shifts, and systemic change. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think this episode has given us some really good tools to start those conversations and take those first steps.
Yeah, and remember, change starts with awareness. The more we talk about these things, the more we normalize these conversations, the closer we get to building a society that's fair and supportive for everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. What's one small step you can take today to challenge those harmful norms and support the men in your life? Maybe it's starting a conversation, offering a listening ear, or advocating for change in your community. Every action, no matter how small, can help create a more just and equitable world. And that's it for today's deep dive. We'll see you next time.